Okay, good day everyone. This is Mark Schneiderman with the Software and Information Industry Association, SIIA, and welcome to our webinar, Common Core for Publishers. This is part 3 of a 4-part series held jointly with APAS Educational Group, and today we'll be focused on grades 6 through 8. We're going to start off with a few announcements, then we will hear from our speakers, and there'll be opportunity for questions. As you heard, this recording this webinar is being recorded. The audio and the slides will be archived for later access by SI members and APAS Educational Group clients. You are in a listen-only mode, and so questions will be submitted via the chat window in the online webinar. A couple of brief announcements for those not familiar. SIIA is the principal trade group for the software and digital content industry. Among our 800+ members are approximately 200 developers of educational software applications, digital content, and web learning services. Our member benefits include market data and information such as this webinar, public policy and advocacy work, and intellectual property and protection. Some of our key initiatives: we recently released our education market report covering the 2011-12 school year that identifies the size and shape of the market at the K-12 level for content, digital software, and online learning services. We're now collecting data for the 12-13 school year as well. And we announced the latest winners in our Innovation Incubator program back in early December. Any young companies with under $1 million in revenue are eligible to apply for the Innovation Incubator program. And some upcoming SIIA events. We just announced today our Education Government Forum on Mobile Learning coming up March 18th to 19th in Washington, D.C. Certainly the issues around Common Core will be front and center at that forum, where we'll hear from local, state, and national educational leaders and policymakers and help you understand the regulations and funding that impact companies and educators. Our signature annual Education Industry Summit will be coming up in mid-May in San Francisco, May 12th to 14th. This annual forum includes strands on sales and marketing, product development and technical issues, and investment issues. And the last of these Common Core 4-part series, the last of these webinars will be held on February 27th, 2 to 3 p.m. That will focus on grades 9 through 12 and conclude our 4-part series. I mentioned the market survey showing the size of the K-12 market. We will be having a webinar in 2 days to share the results of that, share that data and the results of those findings. And then last announcement here is that we're doing a series of webinars with school districts around the country, and we'll be hearing on January 22nd from Miami-Dade County Public Schools in Florida. And of course, the archive recordings and slides from all our past webinars are available on the SI website, including this one, if you'll just give us a day or two to get it posted. So with that, I'm going to turn things over to Betsy Jagos with APAS Education Group, who will give a quick introduction to APAS and then introduce our speakers. Betsy.
Thank you, Mark. It's nice to sort of see everyone. Welcome to the webinar. APAS Educational Group partners with educational publishers and other educational stakeholders to create high-quality custom content. We take our partners' content specs and objectives and make them our content specifications and objectives, so you can sort of consider APAS a handy back office. We work with a very large pool of well-qualified contract associates to develop a lot of different types of content. We've done course development, assessment development, online and blended course and technology deliveries. So pretty much if you can think of it, we can come up with it. We've been in business since 2009. We're headquartered in Michigan, but we have staff sort of scattered all over the country. And we're very pleased to be taking part in the ongoing conversation about Common Core. I'd like to introduce our speaker this afternoon is Karri Weathers. Karri is a distinguished educator who has taught at all K-12 levels. She was recently selected from among a group of elite educators in Tennessee to work with low-achieving schools. Karri partnered with educators and administrators to develop the highest educational experiences possible, and it's our pleasure to have her with us today. I'd also like to introduce Peter Sanchione and Anna Nolan from Natick Public Schools in Natick, Massachusetts. Peter is the superintendent of Natick Public Schools. Prior to this role, he served as the superintendent of the Millis Public Schools in Millis, Massachusetts, and has served as principal of middle schools in several other public school districts. Over the past 12 years, Peter has had the privilege of speaking and presenting nationally on the subject of bullying. We're very pleased to have him with us today. Anna Nolan is the assistant superintendent of Natick Public Schools and a former middle school principal. She's also done extensive work in one-to-one technology and implementation, and we're very glad to have Anna with us as well. So, having introduced everyone, Karri, I think you're up.
Okay, thank you. I have 13 years experience in the classroom, and that ranges from kindergarten through 8th grade. I have 4 years in 8th grade and 2 years in 6th grade, and I always thought it was kind of humorous how whenever I introduced myself as a kindergarten teacher, the response would always be, oh, it takes a special person to be a kindergarten teacher. And anytime I introduced myself as a middle school teacher, people would say, oh, it takes a special person to be a middle school teacher. So I think kindergarten and middle school students are kind of special areas there of students. So we're going to start off looking at 3 different questions today. And the first one is going to be, why do middle school teachers and students need more support for Common Core? And looking at that, there are several things, and these are just typical that probably everyone listening would agree with. Middle school teachers and lessons have most often been trained and designed for lecture direct instruction. I started out in 8th grade, and that's one thing I found. Of course, that's been several years ago, but my textbook was built on kind of what we think of the older student high school model, where it's more teacher-directed, lecture-type direct instruction. When I moved down to lower grades, kindergarten, primary, first, second, you start finding the lessons look a lot different. Of course, content's going to be different, but it becomes much more student involved in lower grades. And I think that's something that Common Core pushes for a lot of student involvement, for students to be taking the lead on lessons. And that's something that middle school teachers and students just are going to need more help with. They just have a lack of experience in those areas. The typical middle school state standards do not require the level of exploration, technology, and discussion that the Common Core standards require. A lot of times I would find that the middle school students don't like to put themselves out there. They don't like to discuss. Of course, you're always going to have a few that do. But there's that fear factor there that you don't have in the lower grades with participation and hands-on and putting themselves out there and sharing their thoughts. Middle school students are often more reluctant to do that, so they're going to need more support. Same thing with the middle school teachers. I feel like at that level, a lot of middle school teachers, especially those that middle school is not necessarily their choice, that was just the first job they were offered, they're less confident in turning over control. And I think that has a lot to do with behavior issues, middle school attitudes. Teachers it's a little bit more intimidating to give 11, 12, 13-year-olds control over your class than to send 5, 6, 7, and 8-year-olds. Give them some leadway. So I think teachers are going to need more support in how to let the students have control but still keep it meaningful. And, you know, our middle school students, they're just caught in the middle. They're still children. They still need hands-on. They still need the fun, exciting lessons, but they also don't want, you know, anything that they feel like is baby. And a lot of times they don't admit that they enjoy those things just for fear of or consider it to be kind of a babyish thing. So when we're thinking about the standards, in black on the screen, if you can see the screen, there's kind of a comparison of state and Common Core standards for middle school. And it's just various states that I found here. One state standard that I found was calculate with circumference and areas of circles. And that is a typical state standard, very basic, lower level, where students are just required to do something. And that can, you know, lead back into, that could be covered through a discussion, teacher-led lesson. However, when you look at a Common Core standard that kind of correlates with that one, it says know the formulas for the area and circumference of a circle and use them to solve problems. And that is very comparable to the state standard. But when you look at what is added on to the end, it's changing quite a bit there, where the students are having to become more involved in the standard. When we look at the next standard with drawing geometric shapes, a lot of state standards have things, you know, where they're having to draw. But when we look at freehand with ruler and protractor and with technology, this is one of the first times with Common Core coming about that we're going to see technology embedded in a lot of the standards, where students are going to have to be taking control of the class and doing things with technology. A state standard in black, determine the slope of a line from an equation, 2 given points, a table, or a graph. And again, that's a very teacher-directed standard where the teacher can get up, work on the, you know, on the board. Students can practice those in class. But when you look at a comparison Common Core lesson, use similar triangles to explain why the slope is the same between any 2 distinct points. That's taking it to a whole new level. You're looking at discussion. You're looking at a deeper understanding that these teachers and students at this grade level just may not be as confident and experienced in. Taking that into mind, how does this affect the publishing of middle school textbooks? I think in general, from experience and from looking at most teachers that I have seen in various schools, primary teachers tend to be creative with their teaching. They like, not that they're better teachers, but they tend to go more for cutesy, interactive, keeping, you know, all kinds of clip art companies in business in lower grades. They will take their textbook and create cute little discovery exploration center stations and activities to match. Middle school teachers are not geared that way most of the time. So as a publisher for a middle school text, you're going to have to be very careful to purposefully add creative lessons into the text to prompt teachers to do those things, to create those hands-on, those discovery, those exploration, those centers and stations. Whereas with primary teachers, their instinct most of the time is to do that anyway. So teachers in this area are going to need a lot more prompting in how to carry out a station, how to carry out a center, how to set up a small group or a lab to match a lesson that typically they would just stand up and do a lecture, teacher-directed lesson with. Younger students, most of the time, will jump in and take over, and you know, in lower grades, they want to tell you everything and share everything with you, whereas middle school students seem to be more reluctant to do that. When creating these lessons, publishers are going to need to prompt students a little bit more to give them more stems and more ideas and more questioning to get the conversation started and keep the conversations on subject. So I think whereas a lot of times a general question may get primary students talking and discussing, middle school students are going to need just a little bit more direction in sparking that conversation. They can have some really good deep conversations once it gets going, but in most cases I've seen anytime you put a thoughtful question out there, you can see it in their eyes, but everyone just kind of sits and is reluctant to answer. So I think they're going to need just a little bit more prompting in getting those meaningful conversations started. The next question that we're going to address is, what is an effective Common Core lesson and how is it different from the typical middle school lesson? We've talked a lot about how middle school lessons and high school lessons are typically teacher-directed, and Common Core is moving more toward responsibility of learning for the student. However, I also think of the typical lesson when I was going through education school. In most of us thinking, most teachers, I feel like, think of the lesson in the typical I do, we do, you do. The teacher shows how, the group practices together, and then the students are given independent work. And I feel like that's our safe model. That's what we are comfortable with. That's what we've been practicing for several years. When Common Core lessons come about and I look at those, I see a backwards design in the lesson plan where we had the I do, we do, you do. The most effective Common Core lessons that I have seen begin with the you do part. The students begin, the students do the discovery, the students come to the conclusions. They're not just told by a teacher, this is how it is, this is the way it works. They're carrying out something to arrive at that concept on their own, and the teacher's there as a facilitator. Students at the middle school age are the perfect age group for this. They should have all of those foundational skills, and again I said should have for any teachers that are on the line. They should have all of those foundational skills built from primary grades to where they are ready to do more exploration, to do more with the foundational skills that they have gained over the years. When looking at some examples of how that backwards design works, one of the math Common Core standards here is understand that positive and negative numbers are used together to describe quantities having opposite directions or values. Anytime in the typical I do, we do, you do textbooks that we were looking at understanding that positive and negative numbers have opposite values or directions, such as on a number line. Typically, the textbook's going to begin with the I do. It's going to have a drawing, or the teacher's going to be directed to draw the number line, and the teacher's going to plot, -3 and 3, and they're going to count the spaces from 0 to 3 and 0 to -3, and they're going to be shown that from the very beginning of this lesson that these are opposite values, they go in opposite directions, and then maybe the students are going to practice on their own, creating number lines and plotting and showing how they're opposite. In a backwards design with the you do, the students would not be given that information from the beginning. They would just be given points maybe to plot positive and negative integers on a number line, and then be prompted to arrive at their own conclusion that 3 and -3 are opposite. So therefore, they're not given the information in the beginning, such as with the typical lesson. They're given the tools to arrive at the information once they've gone through the process, and the teacher is serving more as the guidance or the facilitator just to make sure that everything stays on track and that the students are arriving at the correct idea. The students with Common Core, what I think is the greatest thing about this in this backwards design style is that the students are taking ownership for their own learning, and they're going to have a deeper understanding, and the retention is going to be longer. the tell me and I remember for a day, let me do it and I'll remember for a lifetime, I think is a very important concept here, in that, if you tell me, the retention is just not there as in if I discover it for myself. Looking at a reading lesson or with a reading standard, ELA standard, determine the meaning of words and phrases as they're used in a text. Here, a lot of times when we're looking at the meaning of words and phrases, when we are thinking about the typical reading textbook, most of the times the ones that I've seen, it will have vocabulary words, the beginning of the story, that students or that the publisher feels like students need to know to be successful for that story, successful reading that story. And it's just, a basic glossary in front of the text, and it'll have the word and the definition. That's more of the I do. The teacher's going to read over, here are the vocabulary words for this story. They're going to read the definition. They might give a sentence with them. Then the students are going to practice using the words, making their own sentences. And that's the typical lesson that I have seen in middle school up until the new push with Common Core. Thinking of a backwards design, beginning with the you do, the students are not going to be given definitions for those words. They may be told, this word, this word, this word, and then they're going to have to read some kind of text, a sentence or a passage or paragraph, and arrive at their own definition and create their own definition based on using context clues and how the word is used in a sentence. So therefore, the students are not being told the definition. They're discovering the definition on their own. How is this going to affect publishing? I think publishers are going to need to be thinking of a different format for their lessons. Rather than having a couple of pages of instruction, a couple of pages of practice, and then some independent practice for homework, the whole mindset's going to have to change from how can we, how do teachers need to teach this, to how can students discover this. And that's not easy, just to be honest, to think in that backwards design all of the time. But I think that the whole thing is not going to, it's going to have to take a twist on focusing more on the students discovering the information rather than the teachers teaching the information to the students. It's, like it says on there, publishers will find themselves having to go much further into the teaching and learning theories. I think as a publisher, it's going to be a little bit more involved than probably any textbook creations that there have been. There's going to have to be a little bit more research in there and a little bit more, thinking into how do students think, how do students react, what's going on in the mind of students, where I think in the past maybe publishers have been more focused on teachers rather than students. The final question is, how does Common Core promote individual development? Common Core is the first time that most teachers and students are exposed to speaking and listening standards, where the students are actually encouraged and taught how to discuss, justify, and challenge the thoughts of others. I know in my state standards when I was teaching 6th grade, we had speech standards, but they were more how to give a speech, or listening standards, how to take notes and things of that manner. It would be more things, how to do an outline for a speech, how to keep the audience engaged as far as eye contact and things like that. This is the first time that I think most teachers and students are going to have to purposely focus on how to communicate with other people, how to discuss with other people, and how to justify and challenge thoughts rather than just relay information. There is a 6th grade Common Core standard listed that says engage effectively in a range of collaborative discussions, one-on-one in groups and teacher-led, with diverse partners on grade 6 topics, text, and issues, building on others' ideas and expressing their own clearly. And of course, it's going to be the same thing for grade 7, except for it will be grade 7 topics, and grade 8, except for it will be grade 8 topics. From there, Common Core even goes into showing students how to do this. Come, prepared, studying your material, follow the rules for discussion, setting goals and deadlines, pose and respond to specific questions with others, and review the key ideas expressed and demonstrate understanding. Through these Common Core speaking and listening standards, students are encouraged to express their own thoughts and ideas and discuss those with others. These standards, teachers are going to have to purposely plan opportunities where the students can express their own points of views. And I think a lot of times, I know as a teacher, I feel pressed a lot of times. And you feel like, I've got to teach. And it's hard for us to just stop and allow students to discuss. We feel like a lot of times that we're losing our teaching time because teachers for so long have been taught that they are in control of the class. And it's hard for the teacher to step back and allow the students to discuss. And I think that's something that publishers are going to have to build into their chapters, build into their units, build into their lessons, where most of the time, it's lesson 1, lesson 2, lesson 3, page numbers, read these texts. I think for teachers, it's going to be helpful for publishers to purposely put those things in there, whether it be a whole class period or a certain amount of time. But teachers and publishers both are going to have to purposely plan those discussions, or I'm afraid they're not going to be carried out. Because like I said, a lot of times we don't, as teachers, make time for that discussion because we feel like, we have to move, lesson, and it is hard to find that time to turn over to the students for the discussion. Also, students are introduced to the concept that it's okay to have a different view from others. A lot of times we are very set on this is the correct answer, this is what we want you to arrive at, and we lose that individuality. With Common Core, especially with the speaking and listening standards coming in, students are really given the freedom to think for themselves, to think differently, and the whole direction of it's okay to think differently than the person beside of you and to have a different opinion is really coming through with Common Core to promote individuality. Students are introduced to methods to help them have difference of opinions in a tactful way. Looking here where it says accountable talk and discussion stems, and we had a question pop up with that. That may be kind of, I'm not really acquainted with all of the various states and terminology and things. In my state, we have had a lot with accountable talk, and that is being able to justify your answers and clarify and how to correctly argue a point without it being a heated discussion, where students are basically arguing as in fighting over something. And we have these stems where it's just sentence starters, basically, is what the stem is. And it's kind of teaching students how to tactfully disagree. And, instead of a student yelling out, you're wrong because I feel like it's this, students are taught, to say, I disagree because, and then to justify why they feel like the other student is wrong. Or if another student has given a point that they're not really clear on, they could say, I wonder if you have thought about this, or I wonder if you considered this. Or when a student is justifying their reason, a stem would be to start a sentence, I did it this way because. Okay. So that would be kind of, those are used to help facilitate that meaningful discussion. And how does all of this affect publishing? And we've got something that says, uh-oh, lost audio phone connection. Can everyone still hear me? Is that my audio phone connection that was lost?
Yeah, I think you're fine.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to make sure that you could still hear me. How does this affect publishing in the speaking listening that's kind of promoting on students on individuality? Publishers are going to, again, need to be very mindful of allowing freedom of thought in their text instead of, just saying this is the answer that you should arrive at, or this is how to work the problem, or this is, what you should be thinking as you're reading. They're going to have to allow a little bit more freedom in there and be mindful not to say this is how you should be thinking about this, and to allow students that freedom of individuality. We as adults are often quick to say, this is how you should respond. This is how you should think. This is how you should act. And with Common Core, it's really moving away from that. And it's kind of like it's okay to think that as long as you can justify it. It's okay to respond that way as long as you can justify it. So publishers are going to have to kind of move away from this is right and this is wrong into, justify why, justify, rather than just saying right or wrong. Also, in that, most of the time, textbooks seem to be very directed toward that one student or one concept. And I think with this, Common Core calls for a lot of collaboration with many different thoughts. And publishers are going to need to consider a whole group of students in mind and what's happening in a whole group of classroom, or a small group of students within that lesson. And maybe adding some things in there with, how do you feel about this? Now, how is this different from what a classmate would feel? Or what other opinion might a person have about this? Or how would this be different if you, were male or female? If you were, opposite gender, or if you were a different age. I think in that, publishers are going to have to kind of take that into consideration, that everything is not going to just be directed for that one student that's looking at the textbook. That student's going to be responding with other students, and that student is going to have to learn to not just take his or her thoughts into consideration, but also listening to the thoughts of classmates, listening to the thoughts of others, and discussing those thoughts. So that child is going to have to take their feelings and their opinions and their answers into consideration, and also those of others. So that's a little bit different twist from what the typical textbook, typical teacher, and typical student have encountered in a classroom. So thinking about those three questions, just kind of a recap. Let me move back to where those were at. Thought I could very easily do that, but I have to hit previous to there. Looking at our questions, excuse me, a little delayed. Why do middle school teachers and students need more support for Common Core? From the publisher's standpoint, I think they're going to kind of need more explicit, structured help through Common Core than other grade levels. I think the students are going to need more prompting. I think that the teachers are going to need more direction in this is how to set up a small group. This is how to start a class discussion, and more ideas there than intermediate and primary grade levels. The effective Common Core lesson and how is it different from the typical, I think we're going to have to flip that around, and publishers are going to have to start kind of thinking of at the front of their book or at the front of their lesson, instead of putting all instruction, then the practice, and then the independent work, have some kind of exploring, some kind of not telling the students, but prompting them how to arrive at those concepts themselves, rather than the book just saying, this is the algorithm for long division. Some kind of discovery there, and thinking about how can the student discover this? What is our end result, that backwards design? How can we begin with the you do, where the student is interacting at the very beginning? and then with how does Common Core promote individual development, we're going to have to really hit that speaking and listening. And publishers are going to, like I said, have to purposely, and teachers are going to have to purposely allow for that time in our schedules. And a lot of times teachers feel like they're robbed of time anyway. So I think adding those things in, even if it's not an everyday thing, if it's, 4 lessons and then discussion, or 15 minutes at the end of some kind of that discussion where students are having that accountable talk, where they're talking with each other, that's going to have to purposely be put into textbooks or put into learning materials where there's actually a lesson where students are communicating with one another and sharing their thoughts. And like I said, the accountable talk and the stems and how to tactfully do those things to keep the conversation positive and also on the right track. And that's something that, again, middle school teachers are more reluctant, I think, to turn over conversations because, honestly, you never know what's going to come out of a 13-year-old's mouth or a 14-year-old's mouth. And so teachers are going to need support on how to do that and still have control of the class. And I am open for our responders and any questions that may come through.
Very good. Thank you, Karri. This is Mark Schneiderman at SIIA. So why don't we turn things over to Superintendent Cincione and your Assistant Superintendent, Anna Nolan. Any comments and thoughts and reactions you have? I think we especially want to think about some of our goals of helping developers understand what kind of materials teachers are looking for, what kind of resources schools are looking to pay for, or willing to pay for, and then what are some of the unique value adds or roles for technology. And I certainly, in Karri's presentation, heard a lot about the need for collaboration, which is certainly something that technology can help facilitate. So Superintendent Cincione, appreciate your reactions and thoughts.
Great. Well, first of all, Karri, that was an outstanding presentation, and I know I speak for Anna. We're both former middle school principals, so we resonate really closely to what you were saying. There's no doubt that instructional practices need to be changed as a result of the Common Core and the eventual, in our state anyways, the PARCC exam, or whatever exam is going to measure student learning as a result of the Common Core. We've been fortunate in our district to really employ technology to the greatest extent possible to try to, and I hate to be cliche, but to use terms like flipping the classroom and using blended learning to help students really think about the concepts and the skills we want them to learn and be able to do and to master eventually. And to, again, reiterate what she's saying is to put the student at the forefront of the learning and make the teacher more of the coach. And we've used a lot of the resources that are on the PARCC website, released items and questions, so there's a lot of great material out there that then we've turned into lessons and activities for our students to do. And we certainly spent a lot of time, as you said, collaboration amongst our staff in employing professional learning communities, getting our staff to work together to look at the changes in their instructional practices and the content they have to deliver, and coming up with formative common assessments that we can use then to gauge the student learning. And those assessments are based upon higher level thinking, higher level skills. So I'll give Anna a chance to add to that.
I think I would also push a little bit back on some of the assumptions around middle school students presented there. I think that we, in a very testing-driven time frame in the last few decades, have kind of bred, and your speaker said that, have bred some passivity in terms of students. So I think the next phase of curriculum resource materials really need to appeal to the middle school brain in that they need to help with the cultivation of engagement, not just content delivery for memorization, but helping the teacher to craft projects and lines of inquiry that require kids to manipulate text, to apply it to new and model situations, or novel situations. So a lot of the math examples given, it's not enough to just memorize algorithms. You now need to be able to take what you know, which includes algorithms, but model it on a new situation that your text or your curriculum resource and your teacher are presenting to you, and your teacher will be your coach as you sort through the knowledge that you have and the stimuli that the text might present. I think that returning to some things that we used to know and do a lot better before the standards movement took hold of us in some ways, it would be helpful in that the best curriculum packages that I'm seeing around Common Core right now have thematic links to units that allow students and staff to rise above the actual content and skill standards to bigger ideas. So there are meaty inquiry-based ideas for students to dive into, as well as practice the skills and execute algorithms, those kinds of things. So I think whatever resources are being developed, keeping in mind what the middle school brain needs, which is the engagement, the challenge, the questions, so that it does open up their voice, so they can be that 13-year-old player in the classroom relative to academic content. So we've also enjoyed, in terms of our tech pieces, a curriculum that has things like badge systems involved, where as students move through levels of mastering certain content and questions, new aspects in an adaptive way are opened on the online textbook or in the testing interface, so that students feel a sense of accomplishment and competition with themselves as they walk down their personalized road through a piece of curriculum. So, I mean, that's just my 2 cents as someone who really appreciates the middle school brain and sees this time period as an opportunity to mesh technology and new curriculum standards with new resources.
Great. Thank you very much for that reaction and food for thought. Please, all attendees, please submit your questions in the chat box, and our presenter and reactors are certainly ready to stand by. I'll ask a question here, which is the notion of collaboration and interactions and discovery. To what degree is that shifting the way that educators are thinking about their instructional tools and resources, and shifting that from content to platforms and tools? Is there more of a blending that's sought out than in the past, when maybe the focus was purely on the content and not on the platforms and tools that enabled collaboration and discovery? And to some extent, are schools thinking about shifting instructional content resources over to tools that enable that kind of discovery and learning?
I think that in a lot of cases, of course, tools are definitely needed in many cases, but with some cases it's not necessarily that any materials, physical tools are needed. It's just more that the teacher needs to direct into, instead of jumping in and giving instruction, maybe just posing a question and having a discussion before that takes place, before the teacher actually jumps in and just tells the students. Just posing questions and just having students do that discussion and talk about things. A lot of times they can arrive at those ideas themselves before a teacher actually has to tell them.
And our friends from Natick, any thoughts on that tool versus content question?
Well, our teachers in the one-to-one computing environment that we have here in Natick have told us that working in a one-to-one environment has changed the way they're able to structure their content in this regard. They said they used to do the easy stuff in class. They would fill their students up with content knowledge. They would lecture, they would give notes, and then they'd send them home to do the hardest things, to have discussions or read challenging texts. And now we're turning that around. So content is at our fingertips very easily for most teachers. Now certainly good curriculum resources aggregate those resources so teachers don't have to search too far. But the tools that we're looking for now in the one-to-one and blended environment are how can we encourage students to take that content knowledge, which is so easily at kids' fingertips these days, and teacher fingertips, and use it in a personal environment that is adaptive to their increasing knowledge level. So that it's constantly pushing them to speak more, to move up Bloom's taxonomy in terms of their engagement with the content, and to, in our district, which is a writing intensive district, to write more elegantly about those particular topics.
And so it sounds like that access to the content at home is absolutely critical in Natick in the kind of the flipped model.
And I wouldn't even say in Natick. I think that's, for publishers, I think that's something they're exploring, across the country, is that how do we extend the learning time for all students in a very compacted curriculum, a highly intensive, time-consuming curriculum. How can we extend that learning to involve the students a little bit more, to involve the parents a little bit more in this active learning environment?
We have a question. The speakers indicated that the constructivist approach is mandated by the Common Core standards. Is there no room for systematic, explicit instruction in the Common Core standards?
Yes, and I have typed up, and I was sending that to him. I'll just read you what I have typed up. I believe that some topics require explicit instruction, and some of the Common Core standards are straightforward and systematic. I believe that Common Core is not about replacing systematic instruction, but just carrying it a step further, moving on beyond explicit instruction. So after the explicit instruction, then what? What about the application? And I feel like that's where Common Core is going. Not everything can be done with a discovery. Some things students, multiplication facts are still there. And while there are, there are some ways to do some discovery with addition and things, there are still going to be things out there that students just have to know, in my personal opinion. But I think the difference there with Common Core is moving beyond it, taking the systematic, and then, what do you do from there, where a lot of times we've just stopped and we haven't hit that application. We've just stopped with the knowledge. And so I think that with Common Core, it's not necessarily a replacement, but it's just a moving forward, moving beyond.
Great. Thank you for that response. We're just got a few minutes left here. If there are any other questions from the attendees, I encourage you to type those in now. I'll ask a more of a political question, I guess. We continue to see questions and pushback about the Common Core standards, and I know that developers of instructional resources are trying to figure out which way the wind is blowing because they're investing a lot in creating materials. What are you all seeing in Massachusetts and Natick and Tennessee and other places you're working and talking about? How much of that is based on just lack of understanding? How much is resistance to change? How much of it are perhaps real, real valid points where the standards may need to go through some evolution in the coming years? Any thoughts on?
Well, this is Anna from Natick. The Common Core is very clear in its presentation. It's not the how, it's the what. And I think the previous speaker is dead on that because of the broadness of the standards and the meatiness of them, many times a more inquiry-based or constructivist approach is doable. Whereas in some of our previous standards, they were so specific that there was not necessarily that opportunity. I think that when you get broad like that, you you run the risk of not having everything nailed down in a way that is knowable by the average citizen. So the average parent isn't going to be able to take a broad standard and unpack it to understand what the steps are, but that's what we trust professional educators to do. And leaders have to undertake that with their teachers, and that's the process that we're all going through now. When you go through that process, you are ultimately reassured of the rigor of the standards and excited by the potential for critical thinking, application of technology, and sort of more robust application of ideas than in previous standards. At least that's our experience in Massachusetts so far. I think the media has taken this in some directions, and there's people who haven't really read very closely who are just looking for that one text that is no longer included in the Common Core, or the grade level that something is discussed is at issue. So I think you really have to take a broad and deep look at the standards. We're not seeing a lot of pushback from families or our political community on the Common Core. Other things that have been mandated in the state, but definitely not the Common Core itself.
What I'm seeing from teachers is most teachers, I have met very few teachers that just do not want to do a good job. And most teachers are willing, very willing to do a good job. They want to be an effective teacher. I think the greatest thing here, in agreeing with Anna, is just of the change, just moving into the unknown. And that is stressful in itself. It's just getting out of your comfort zone, because for so long the comfort zone has been just the typical lessons that we've, not with all of the discovery and things. So I think for a lot of teachers it's just getting out of that comfort zone. And I definitely think that textbooks can help do that. Publishers can help teachers feel more confident, because, when you're prepared, you're confident. And so I think definitely having adequate materials where teachers feel prepared is a good tool to help teachers feel more comfortable.
Great. It looks like we have one last question here. I see text, or maybe this is a statement, but I'll read it either way and get any reaction. One of our attendees writes, I see text where vocabulary is presented prior to reading, with more or less support included for teachers to allow students to do discovery learning with those words. I see these texts for the purpose of allowing students to read challenging texts without interruption, so they can engage with texts that would stop them in their tracks, where they're left to deal with vocabulary on their own. So I wonder whether you think that sometimes it might be worth even a straight-up glossary in order to allow students to access texts that are challenging in other ways.
I think that's something that it's one of those things. There is no clear rule for everything. That's just like anytime you have to consider what's the purpose. If you're reading a passage for fluency, you don't want anything challenging. You need something that the student is going to read multiple times. And so definitely, if it's a challenging, if the whole purpose is to get students involved in a challenging text, then definitely giving some words out there. But if your purpose is to meet that standard where students are supposed to be able to use context clues to develop, to come up with vocabulary meanings, then they also need to be able to not just look in a glossary to find a definition. So there's room out there for everything, and there's a time and a place. And I think that is one major thing that educators and publishers have to acknowledge, is that there's not one thing that's going to make you effective. It's the mixture and combination of everything combined that's going to be successful for students.
Okay. Very good. Peter or Anna, any last thought?
I think the overlying message of this conversation is that it's hard work. And it's one of the things we say to our teachers all the time, and it's hard work in the context of it's a must-to-do. And so how do we help people do the must-to-do work of embedding these standards into their teaching and delivering instruction at high-quality levels? And I think so much of it, though, as already been said, is building confidence and allowing teachers to work together and try things and to use assessments to the greatest extent possible to see how students are doing, but to use it in a way that we learn from what works and doesn't work, not in a supervisory way or an evaluative way, so we can build a lot of trust with our staff to continue to let them experiment and try things. And I think when you get to that situation, then your staff is in a good place and they're comfortable with the work that has to be done.
Very good. Well, I think those are terrific concluding thoughts for today's webinar. I want to thank all three of you for taking the time to join us today and for sharing your experiences and suggestions with the developers and publishers that represent SI's membership and APAS Education Group clients. Our next webinar is covering grades 9 through 12 of the Common Core Standards on February 27th. So I encourage you to go and register for that now if you haven't already. And with that, and make sure to look out for the archive of this webinar as well. So with that, I want to thank you all again, and I wish everyone a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mark.
Thank you. Please stand by.